Hi there, everyone. My name is Martin Hoxie. I'm Chief Innovation, Community and Technology Officer for the Association for Learning Technology, and I'm hoping you're able to join for our first inaugural ALT community call. So this is our monthly call where we start connecting to some of the people in our community and find out some of the things that they're doing. Lorna, I'm just detecting a bit of feedback from you, so I might need to get you to put your headphones on. Connecting to some of the people in. So while Lorna's doing that, so welcome to everyone joining the call, and just to remind you that we can take questions during the call if you want to use the Alt-C hashtag. So Alt-C, and also some of the stuff Lorna's going to be talking about is around Open Scotland Declaration. So Alt-C hash Open Scot if you want. We also got so I'm just getting, so one of my spies is saying that the audio is not great, but I'm hoping that was just because of the initial issues with one of the speakers, but hopefully that will settle itself out. So yes, reminder that you can also ask questions through the Google Plus page, through the Q question and answer module. So now I've got through all that pre-show stuff, I'd like to welcome Lorna. Hello, Lorna. And now Lorna's muted.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now.
Yeah. Oh, this is such fun. So anyway, I'm very grateful that Lorna.
Thank you, Martin, for asking me along today.
Yeah. So as you'll soon quickly discover, if you're not already familiar with Lorna's work, she has multiple hats. So, but she does a lot within the open education community. So, as part of her role, and also within the alt community. So, we thought she was a nice person to start our calls with. So, Lorna, welcome. So, I've mentioned that you've got many hats. So, can you, for those not familiar with you, can you give us a bit of background about the things that you do?
Thank you. I'm still getting a bit of feedback here, so you'll have to excuse me. I'm sort of hearing Martin talking a couple of times. But I'd like to thank Martin for inviting me along today. As he said, I've got multiple hats. Some of you might know me from work that I've been involved with CETIS for a number of years. I still work with some of my CETIS partners. But now I'm based at the University of Edinburgh, where I work as Digital Education Manager within EDINA. And I also work as OER Liaison Officer within the Learning, Teaching and Web Services Division here at the university. So I kind of switch hats on a regular basis. So that's really where I am now.
So I suppose one of the interesting things there is that, you know, and I think hopefully we can share some of your expertise on this call, is that, you know, you've got these multiple hats. So hopefully you're seeing a lot of things happening across the community, both nationally and internationally, around the area of open education.
Yes, certainly there's a lot going on still in the area of open education internationally, and also here in the UK. I think the open education landscape has changed a lot, particularly in the UK, since the end of the UK OER programme. But I think we are seeing openness really being embedded in institutions now. There are a lot of, particularly within the higher education sector, institutions that are starting to develop open education policies, and as well as having ground-up initiatives, we're now starting to see top-down policy initiatives in institutions as well. Now, clearly that's not uniform across the board, and I think there are a lot of issues still to be addressed, but there's certainly still a lot of activity there. One of the other initiatives I've been involved in is the Open Policy Network, which is supported by Creative Commons, and that's really there to disseminate and promote open policy at the international level. So that's, I think, a really good network to be plugged into.
Is there anything? I suppose the issue is that, you know, there is no one thing that is going to be, you know, the kind of driving force behind this, but it, you know, like you, I'm seeing similar sorts of signs of increased awareness and increased appetite towards openness, you know, in various aspects of our life, including education. Is there anything in particular that you see driving this, or you know, is it kind of this invisible force, you think?
Well, I think clearly, like many things, I mean, the funding situation that we find ourselves in is a real driver, which is affecting moves both towards and away from openness. And I think, you know, there is a realization that we need to do more with less resources, and that we need to be very strategic about how we share and how we use our content. And also, I think, in terms of how we engage with students. And I think Martin Weller's alt webinar yesterday spoke a lot about the impact of openness, both on teaching staff and on learners. And I think there is a recognition that greater openness in education can be hugely beneficial for students. And I think one of the things I'm quite interested in is the interface between open practice and open content. And I think to some extent there has been a bit of a move away from open educational resources perhaps over the last couple of years. I think there's a bit of a feeling that we've done OER, that's sorted, we now move on to open practice. But I think in actual fact there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of open content, in terms of there are a lot of silos of content that really there's no justification for them to be closed other than, you know, just habit really. And I think that there's a lot more to be done in terms of opening access to these silos of educational content and also cultural heritage content as well, which could be hugely beneficial to education. And I think if we can continue to focus effort there while at the same time developing open practice, then I think we'll really start to see movement in this space. Because again, the education sector is changing enormously. Many of us do, very few of us now have tenured posts in institutions. We move around a lot. Somebody recently jokingly referred to me having a employment portfolio, which basically meant I do have lots of hats. And I think if you are working across these boundaries, then really becoming an open practitioner is second nature to some extent. And I think perhaps institutions need to learn to support this and to recognise and reward staff who are making efforts in this area.
This is one of the interesting points I think as well raised yesterday at the webinar about the TEF, and you know, incorporating openness is one of the things there. You mentioned there about you know, opening up silos of resources. So one of the ongoing discussions on the open education special interest group mailing list is what's going to happen to Jorum, you know, which is one of the main, you know, open repositories that we have in the UK. What you know, are there any personal views on the, you know, Jorum and where it goes in the future you'd like to share?
I mean, I'm not in a position to comment on what JISC's plans are in that area, other than, you know, what they've said in public themselves. They've I believe they said that there will be I think it's at the JISC App Store that they're referring to, and that the high quality content will be moved there. In terms of more generally of whether there is a role for a service of that kind, there has been some really interesting discussion going on the mailing list of the Alt Open Education SIG over the last week about this very issue. And personally, I think there is a role for a central repository of open educational resources within the UK, but I think it's important to recognise that by their very nature, open educational resources will scatter all over the web. And I think that's actually beneficial. I think we actually really want to encourage that. And if we sort of cast our minds back to the UK OER programme, the guidelines for that were to put content in as many places as you want, and also Jorum. And what we were trying to do was to make sure that the content would get right out there and reach as many people as possible. But I think there is a role for a central repository, perhaps for individuals or institutions who don't have that kind of facility, who are less keen to use web-based archives such as YouTube, etc. But I also think that there's a real role for lighter weight systems of aggregators that can draw in content from these multiple sources. So things like the Solvanauts aggregator is a really good example of how you can draw in open educational resources from multiple places. So we need these. We need as many different approaches as possible to finding open educational content, because we know that's still an issue. It continually gets reported that people still find it easier to create content from scratch than going to find open educational resources that might already be out there. So any strategies that will help colleagues, students, staff to find open content have got to be beneficial. So yeah, I think perhaps it's hard to say how the closure of Jorum, what kind of impact that will have until we know what's going to replace it. So I think it's kind of, I think like a lot of people, I'm kind of sitting back and waiting to see, well, you know, what is going to come next.
Yeah, I can see how, having looked at some of the discussions on this, one of the issues is this very thing where people lumped everything into Jorum, and now they didn't have other copies of the resources, so a distribution model seems to fit that, with obviously then your technical challenges, aggregating it back in.
Yes.
Earlier you mentioned some of the kind of more cultural artifacts. I wondered if you could just, having known you for a number of years, I know you actually started out life as an archaeologist.
Yes.
I just wondered how that shapes your view on social cultural artifacts.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Actually, I do think perhaps that within higher education we perhaps get very focused on the content that we produce and we use within our own institutions, and I think that there is so much more out there that we could really make use of, and I really admire a lot of the work that's going on in the Open GLAM sector. I think some of our cultural heritage institutions have made great strides in terms of opening up their content. And I also just think this stuff really needs to be in the public domain. I mean, this is our cultural heritage, and anything that makes that more accessible has got to be for the benefit of all of us, really. And I think an interesting example of this is the National Library of Scotland's new strategy, which was published last week, which again is all about opening access to the collections. But yeah, I think perhaps, my archaeological roots are showing in that I always want to excavate things and find things and make sure that they are archived and accessible. So yes, perhaps that has influenced a lot of my later career, perhaps.
You mentioned Open GLAM there. For people not familiar with Open GLAM, can you just...
Sorry, Open GLAM in this context is galleries, libraries, archives and museums. And I think it's not a community, I confess, that I'm hugely plugged into. but it is very active. I know a lot of you will be familiar with things like the Europeana initiative. And this is one of the themes that we want to try and explore at next year's OER 16 conference. The main theme of that conference is open culture. And one of the things that we want to look at, hopefully, is how we can start to break down the barriers between some of our cultural heritage institutions and our education institutions, so that we can actually bring these contents and these content collections together to, basically to encourage the use of these collections within education. So if this is an area that you're working in, or you have colleagues who are working within this area, this is my plug for the OER 16 conference. Please do consider submitting a paper. That the call is already out, and I believe the submission site will be available very, very shortly as well. So watch this space.
Yeah, so if you want to find out more about OER 16, hopefully the website's easy enough to find, but it's oer16.oerconf.org, and this is an event that Alt is proudly supporting as well. Just looking at the focus for OER 16, there are some really interesting themes that you've got there in terms of around things like culture of openness and public engagement. One of the other things there you've got is the challenges of open washing, which is well, perhaps I should ask you to, for those not familiar with the term open washing, what does open washing mean?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we really want to look at, one of the other conference themes, as Martin said, is the embedding of openness within institutions. And I think it's very easy for institutions to start to say, oh yes, we do openness. We have an open access repository. That's one aspect of openness, that's fine. But that doesn't mean, say, you're doing open education. Perhaps another example of open washing might be saying, yes, we have a MOOC, we do open education. One MOOC does not make open education. It's very much part of the open education landscape. But I think that there's a lot more to it. And I think, I mean, it's interesting because I think MOOCs have had an impact on how we view open education. And that, I think, has been both detrimental and beneficial. MOOCs have certainly raised the profile of openness, but I think they've also muddied the waters in terms of how we understand openness. I very much see MOOCs as part of the open education landscape, but I think part of that landscape is also open licenses, open content, open practice, and also things like, open access to scholarly works, open data, open research. And again, within the call for the OER 16 conference, one of the things we want to look at is how can we break down the barriers between these communities of openness, if you can call them that, or these different open domains. And I think having a more nuanced understanding of openness is critical to that. And I think that will help us to ensure that we're not in a position where we're in danger of open washing.
A cheeky question, and I won't be offended if the answer is no. Can you give us a hint of any of the speakers you've got lined up for OER 16?
No. Actually, that's not quite true. I'm very pleased to announce that one of our invited speakers will be Kathryn Cronin, who gave a really inspiring keynote at the Alt conference last year, and is currently engaged in some really, really interesting open educational research. So we're very, very pleased that she's agreed to present one of our invited talks. But beyond that, I'm not going to reveal anything.
Well, it's great. Well, we know Kathryn quite well in the offices, and so we look forward to news of who else you've managed
You'll be the first to hear, don't worry about it.
I'd imagine there's not much arm twisting required, or is there to come to OER 16, given that it's in the glorious sunny Edinburgh. There were a couple of kind of standing questions. We're obviously finding our feet with this format, so yeah, this is about the alt community, and I was just wondering, what was your first memory of the association? How did you become aware of what the organisation was doing?
I can't remember when I first became aware of alt. I started working in education technology in 1997. And I actually had to go back and look at my list of publications and presentations. And I was surprised to discover that first time I presented at the alt conference was the year 2000. But I'm pretty sure I would have come across alt before then. I may even have been to previous conferences, but certainly 2000 was the first year that I presented along with Charles Duncan and Alison Littlejohn. And I attended the alt conference and presented at the alt conference for I think the next 4 years. And then I took a bit of a break after that. And certainly for a number of years, I used to go to the alt conference every second year. Last year, I had the interesting experience of just attending the conference virtually. I wasn't able to attend in person. And that was actually a really, really rewarding experience. I heard all the keynotes, which I think was a first for me. And certainly if you can't get to the conference in person, I can highly recommend participating virtually. But in terms of other alt activities, I'm involved in the Alt Scotland Special Interest Group, which is very active up here north of the border, and runs some really well-attended and very stimulating annual events, and has been instrumental in promoting openness in Scotland. And I also dabble with around the edges of the Alt Open Education SIG. I've already mentioned some interesting discussions that have been going on there recently. So yeah, I think it's really interesting seeing the way that alt has evolved and developed, and I think the special interest groups have been really positive in terms of engaging the community. And like I said, certainly up here in Scotland, the Scottish SIG certainly fulfills a very valuable role, and it's also really interesting to see the FE sector starting to engage more with alt as well.
We've got a question come in, so I feel I did have more questions, but I'm going to Teresa McKinnon has kindly got a question for us. So for those interested in such things, where do we point folk who cannot conceive a business model that matches open education? I don't know if you have any immediate thoughts for that.
Sorry, the feedback got me there. Business model for open education. A difficult one to answer concisely. I think it's important to look at open education in the context of the institution as a whole, and I think it's difficult to if you focus just on monetary returns, I think it can be very difficult to make a valid business case. But I think there are many other factors that you need to look at, including the student satisfaction for a start. I think developing the resource of the institution in terms of the staff. I think in terms of like being forward-looking in education development, all these things are very important. And certainly, if you are interested in the business case for openness, I seem to recall that just commissioned a really good report on this quite a long time ago now, 3 or 4 years ago now. The report was written by Lou McGill and others. I certainly revisited that recently, and a lot of what's in that report is still highly relevant. But I think one of the questions to ask when considering business models for openness is, why wouldn't you want to be more open? And I think we also need to consider, you know, what is the detriment to institutions who aren't open? So I would certainly, you know, sort of flip the question around like that as well.
I think it is a challenging question, and it's at this point that I like to point people to the clothesline paradox.
That's a new one on me.
Like me to, you know,
the clothesline paradox.
Thank you for asking. The clothesline paradox, it was something around in the 70s when they were looking at renewable energy. So, for example, if you look at the cost benefit of solar power, it's really hard to actually measure that in a financial terms, particularly when you start factoring other things. So if you consider, you know, if you put your washing out on the clothesline instead of the tumble dryer and dry it by the sun, then there's you know, a benefit, you know, to the environment for doing that. But no one's out measuring how many loads of washing you put on the clothesline. And I think that's a similar thing for open education and open education practices. You know, people aren't going around measuring, you know, consistently how much money you're saving on, you know, a very simple example would be textbooks, so going to an open textbook model. So I think that's one of the challenges when you start talking about business models around open education. I think you're very right to highlight that, you know, why wouldn't you want to be doing this sort of thing? Lots of benefits there. So Teresa, thanks for that challenging question. So we're almost out of time. So just before we finish the call, there, as a community call, we're obviously interested in connecting with our community. So we'll hopefully be doing these once a month. So if you'd like to be at the other end of one of these calls, then please drop us a line, and you can find us at on Twitter with the Alt account, or via the contacts form on our website. Just a couple of things to highlight. So as Lorna mentioned, we have a couple of special interest groups that you might want to join. You should find information about those reasonably easy on the Alt website. So Lorna mentioned the Open Education Special Interest Group, and we have a growing number of regional interest groups as well. So we have Alt Scotland. Also check out our events page. We've got quite a few events coming up over well, the next year. So in particular, we've got the online winter conference on 9th of December. So if you're interested in participating in that, there's you can just sign up for that. And obviously not to forget Open Education Resources 16, or OER 16 as it's more commonly known, is 19th, 20th April. You can start thinking about your submissions for that, and the actual submission form should be live later this week. So Lorna, I've got through all that. Finally, I'd just like to joining us and sharing some of your experiences, expertise, and your viewpoints on this sector and, you know, this area. So thank you very much for that, and
thank you, Martin.
I'm sure we'll be seeing you online. Well, thanks everyone, and bye.